I'm going to talk a bit about Afghanistan and then about Pakistan. Um, President Obama was recently in Kabul and he signed the strategic compact with President Karzai, which commits American forces and American support and money for another 10 years beyond 2014. And, you know, there were two very interesting things that he said. The first thing he said in his speech that I'm now going to describe to you how we wind down the war and how we reduce the conflict before 2014. And in fact, in the rest of the speech, he never answered that question. And I think a lot of people, a lot of Afghans and a lot of people in the region were waiting for him to outline a political strategy for the end of the war. What we had instead was that what we've heard before is a military strategy as to how the Americans will withdraw from Afghanistan in 2014. The newly trained Afghan army will replace the Americans, and how after 2014 special forces and other forces will stay behind to, you know, take out the terrorists and to give support for the Afghan army. Now, I think, you know, the real problem here is that there are huge imponderables. As we all know, that the situation in Afghanistan is unpredictable and precarious. There's a very strong chance that maybe this strategic compact cannot be implemented by the time 2014 comes. In the last year, 50 American soldiers have been killed by Afghan soldiers. What happens if this figure doubles or triples in the next 18 months? How are American soldiers going to be monitoring and mentoring Afghan soldiers? But really, there's a triple crisis as I see it. The first is the crisis in the international community. There's an enormous reluctance, despite America's very magnificent offer to commit itself to Afghanistan. And even though a lot of the European countries are saying we'll do the same thing, we know the economic crisis in the world today may not allow that to happen. Afghanistan, at the very barest minimum, is going to need about $6 billion a year for the next 10 years just to sustain the security forces and to pay the salaries of the civil service. Now, that money is needed, and clearly the Americans can't provide all that money. That money has to be shared amongst the allies, the Western allies, whether that money is going to be available or not. Secondly, we've just seen this French presidential election. The French president is going to probably move his troops out of Afghanistan this year. In other words, setting a precedent which other countries may well follow. Secondly, there is a regional crisis. When President Obama came in, he advocated, and especially his special envoy who he appointed, Richard Holbrooke, advocated the need for a regional settlement. Afghanistan is a country with 6 immediate neighbors. All of them have grossly interfered in Afghanistan's life. Most blatantly of all in the 1990s, when all these countries were involved in the civil war, fueling one side or the other. So what was needed, and what is still needed, was a regional compact where the regional countries would come together and agree that post-America withdrawal, there would not be interference in Afghanistan, and that they would hold back. Now, unfortunately, we have a situation where America can't talk to 2 of the major powers in the region who have the most influence in Afghanistan. The first is Iran, because of the nuclear issue. And there was a hope, I think Richard Holbrooke certainly had the hope at one time, of even trying to, you know, siphon off the Afghan issue and be able to talk to the Iranians separately on the Afghan issue without having to bring in the whole nuclear paradigm. That now is not possible. The other problem is Pakistan. For the last 6 months, the US has had, for 5 months, it had absolutely no relations. Relations were broken off between the 2 countries. The anti-American mood in Pakistan is very, very strong. Part of it has been fueled by the military and the intelligence agencies deliberately. But nevertheless, there is a very strong anti-Pakistan mood in the anti-American mood in the country. So two of the biggest allies in the regional equation are just not willing to talk to the Americans right now. And this poses a huge problem. Because if we're talking about a withdrawal in which there is no regional compact, certainly the Pakistanis will push the Taliban, Iran will push its allies in the Northern Alliance, and we could be back to a kind of 1990s scenario, except much worse. Because everybody now has more weapons, more arms, and more funding, and more is at stake, etc. The third issue are all the internal problems that Afghanistan faces. And I will just highlight a couple of them. The first to my mind is the economy. Afghanistan has not been, despite all the $600 billion that America has spent and over $100 billion that Europe has spent in Afghanistan, we still do not have a sustainable economy in Afghanistan that can provide jobs to young people and sustain some kind of democratic setup in the country. And this failure is most of all, I think, will be felt with the young people who have been servicing the foreign troops. You've had 150,000 foreign troops. Tens of thousands of Afghans have been working for these foreign troops. They will be left jobless when these foreign troops leave. And the economy is just not there to sustain them. So I think this problem weighs very heavily on the international community. But unfortunately, we don't hear it discussed either by anyone, by any world leader is discussing this problem. And there are other huge problems, of course. Drugs production, heroin production continues apace. The danger is once, Western troops leave, a lot of farmers will go back to producing even more heroin, and there'll be less controls on their export to the West, etc. The ethnic problem in Afghanistan has widened considerably, partly because of the desire by the Karzai government to talk to the Taliban. So if we look at all this, the international scenario, the regional scenario, and the domestic problems that still remain behind in Afghanistan, not only would the withdrawal not be easy, but pretending that there can be a successful military transfer to the Afghan army, which the jury is still out. Is the Afghan army competent enough to stand up to the Taliban? This is an army that is 90% illiterate, which is heavily dependent on drugs still, where the desertion rate is between 20 to 25%. So, is this army really going to be able to stand up to the Taliban?